Welcome, beautiful human, and thank you so much for joining us for today's festivities. Hope you got those fireworks handy because things are about to get lit. We're diving into some of the strangest, most outlandish, and questionable products to have ever hit the Great Barrier Reef, and I'm talking about odd kitchen sponges. Spongebob is weird, but that's a huge part of his appeal. The first few seasons of the show were able to successfully craft a world that, well, the world had never seen before. It's impossible to compare the show to something that had come before it. Its only obvious influence is marine biology, but beyond that, Bikini Bottom is outrageously iconic and unique. Thus, when the franchise began to expand into other forms of media, there was a lot to work with in terms of crafting different experiences, and video games were no exception. SpongeBob has certainly had an up and down trajectory with them, but today I wanted to focus on some games that were strange, even for SpongeBob. These are games that either went in different directions in terms of gameplay, or flat out flipped the SpongeBob universe over its head and placed the fish in mind-blowing scenarios. Sometimes these experiments actually created some really fun and engaging adventures. Other times, they become new topics I bring to therapy. So let's take a look at some of these games, starting with one of the earliest SpongeBob games to ever, well, exist. SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge is a 2001 platform game developed by Climax Development. It was released for the PlayStation November 5th of 2001 and also came out on GBA. Fun fact, the PS1 version of Super Sponge sold 1.06 million copies, becoming one of the console's best-selling games. The premise is pretty simple. It's Patrick's birthday, and SpongeBob wants to give him the best present ever, a photo signed by his favorite superheroes, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. However, the heroes want nothing more than to get rid of SpongeBob, so they keep sending him to accomplish random tasks around Bikini Bottom. This is the first SpongeBob home console game to have ever come out, and it's a 2D game. I mean, I guess it's a good place to start. Okay, not completely 2D actually, because there are some 3D objects in the environment, which just makes everything look weird. It's like developers couldn't decide on a singular look for the game, so they just threw in whatever they wanted and meshed it all together. And to make things even more awkward, the environment literally loads in as you walk into it. And you can't even use the fact that it was on old hardware as an excuse, because there were plenty of PS1 games that were not only loading their complete environments, but were also completely 3D. I guess the character sprites look okay. Every character sort of just stands in place and blinks for their idle animations. Except Gary, just why does he move like that while everyone else is completely still? And I guess the voice acting isn't that bad, but man, why does Mermaid Man sound like that?
Peanut butter, tomatoes, jelly.
I think that's everything I got for the presentation, as I actually only played this game for 15 minutes, but I have a very strong reason for that. I tend to be a lot more positive about licensed games because I think something charming about them is that the actual license can really help elevate the experience, even if the game does have its flaws. However, this game is just beyond saving. This is single-handedly the most horrible, saddest excuse for a SpongeBob game I've ever played. And I played 12 hours of Plankton's Robotic Revenge. This game has some of the most broken collision physics I have ever seen in a game. So here I am on the second level of the game where I'm climbing up Sandy's tree dome. Before I get into collision, one of the dumbest things I encountered in this game was the use of the helmet here. Sandy gives you a helmet to help you breathe in the tree dome. Okay, that makes sense in the SpongeBob universe. However, you still have to jump into these tubs of water on your way up the tree dome or you will die. What? It makes no sense to me. Like, either the helmet is way too big for SpongeBob and it's leaking out like crazy, or SpongeBob is here carrying around a helmet for no reason, thus is solely getting water from these tubs. Either way, it's a really dumbfounded scenario. Back to the issue that made me rage quit this game. You have these tiny ass platforms to land on with SpongeBob, and when I attempted to climb up this tree dome, I found myself falling straight through the platform with half of my attempts. Sometimes it would result in me falling all the way down to the bottom and having to start all over for reasons completely not my fault. It was absolutely outrageous, and I couldn't believe I'd finally found a SpongeBob game that frustrated me in this way. I had to stop playing at that point because it was actually hurting me mentally to try to get through that. The game has some nice music, I guess, and a nice FMV intro, but it's a shame I'll never experience the rest of it. And I really will never experience the rest of it. I don't care. Well, that's 10 million points against anything weird and different, so let's see if a licensed game based off of a terrible TV movie based off of a show in rapid decline to see if that can even the odds. SpongeBob's Atlantis SquarePandas is a 2007 video game based on Atlantis SquarePandas TV movie, which is centered around SpongeBob and his friends journeying to the lost city of Atlantis. The Wii and PS2 versions were developed by Blitz Games, who actually show up quite a bit on this list to be honest. One of the weirdest things about this game is the fact that it is essentially a minigame collection for single players only. I don't know, is it me or is making a minigame collection single player exclusive sort of defeating the purpose of these sorts of games? Now, it's not like it's a party game akin to Lights Camera Pants or the many Mario Party games you're probably thinking about, but a lot of what you do in this game is akin to many minigames in these collections that came out around the time. I'm pretty sure every party game on the Wii has a point and shoot game much like this one. This button pressing rhythm game is a classic trope in many party games, although this one does have the best guitar solo. Also, the fact that Nickelodeon greenlit a video game for a TV special on home consoles that wasn't true for Square is just such a strange thing in of itself. But I guess considering how rapidly promoted this movie was, it must have been the peak for licensed games, I guess, in terms of profit. Atlantis SquarePandas was actually the first SpongeBob game I ever reviewed for this channel. I know, really random choice. It's a pretty bad video, but you can check it out in the top right corner if you like. To summarize it, I was somewhat fond of the game. It had its fun moments and it was a nice waste of time. Playing it again this time around, nothing much has really changed. The game is what it is, just a small collection of minigames loosely tied to a story that's really not that great anyway. Nothing here is absolutely terrible, but there's not much that's out of this world fun either. I will say the levels where you are playing as a pair of characters and have to basically solve a maze to get to the next level is actually really fun and could potentially be a nice idea for a spin-off. Each of the characters you play has a unique ability to help progress through each level, and different combinations of characters can result in different scenarios to make each experience unique. SpongeBob has a spatula to lift gates and change cannon directions, for instance. Patrick can toss characters and anchors across large distances and get across that way. Mr. Krab's pockets are magnetically attracted to money, and also make him extremely creepy. But yeah, these levels are a blast. It's just such a shame there's two of them, but they're pretty lengthy compared to all the other levels, and so I guess it's kind of even in that sense. But everything else is pretty meh, especially the abundance of button sequence minigames that get really redundant very quickly. There's literally one version of it here where you're pressing buttons while watching the characters walk through Atlantis. Who thought this would be entertaining? There's absolutely nothing here for most people. If you're someone that's just like a regular casual fan of SpongeBob and not really into video games, then yeah, there's really nothing here for you. But I guess Atlantis SquarePandas is something I think any SpongeBob fan would enjoy. There's a multitude of costumes you can use to dress up SpongeBob, for instance, which is a ton of fun. There's also this fun feature where you can have SpongeBob offer commentary for every minigame here, which is hilarious for fans of the show. They basically have the scenario where the game is actually a film set and they're filming the TV special here. It's a game that as a SpongeBob fan, it just makes me smile. I'm not gonna put it down as the greatest thing in the world and definitely not even the greatest SpongeBob game, but I had a genuinely good time going through it. Plus, mute Mr. Krabs is so weird. Well, that was oddly amusing. I have a feeling we're gonna see the crazy lads of Blitz pop up again in the near future. Oh look, here they are. SpongeBob Surf and Skate Road Trip was also developed by Blitz Games on Xbox 360, and it's the first SpongeBob game on Xbox to use a Kinect. So we already know this is gonna be a hot mess. The premise of this game is SpongeBob and Patrick reliving their crazy road trip to the beach through some slideshows leading into arcade style gameplay where you're, you guessed it, surfing and skating through gnarly tracks. Before I even delve into the mechanics of a SpongeBob Connect game, one thing I can always count on is Blitz Games bringing forward the strangest aesthetics to the table. Surf and Skate is certainly no exception. The game has a cel-shaded style to it, which I actually really like and would love to see return in a future title. But beyond that, everything in this game looks a lot closer to something like Rocket Power than SpongeBob. Everything looks very Beach City-esque, which yes, does match up with the actual premise of the game, but I can't lie, I feel like this game would have benefited from being placed somewhere more SpongeBob-esque, if you know what I mean. For instance, this would have been a perfect opportunity to place a SpongeBob game in Goo Lagoon, and it would have been so cool seeing that place in this cel-shaded style in particular. Everything about the visuals and sound of this game just feels unlike Spongebob, and this is not inherently a bad thing, as I do encourage developers to do unique things with the license, but it just feels like a different franchise's game with SpongeBob and Patrick splattered all over it. Nothing about the screen SpongeBob or Bikini Bottom. If you're gonna do something different with SpongeBob, then at least make it something that's different but still feels like something that, you know, has impact with the SpongeBob franchise. But honestly, this feels like a completely different universe, and I don't know, it just isn't my cup of tea personally, even with the cel shaded style. The rock music is pretty sick, I guess, but the reused Creature from the Krusty Krab music is really out of place here with these aesthetics. As for the actual game, well, it's a Kinect game, and it was so much fun. Okay, the game itself is controlled in as functional of a way as you would expect. The only real thing I can criticize is the method of turning left and right. To do so, you have to move your foot at front to the left or right. I just feel like it would have been so much more intuitive to tilt your whole body left and right, you know? But instead, turning left and right is kind of a chore, and there's always going to be a delay of what you're doing anyway because of the Kinect, but now there's even more of a delay because the movement is just plain awkward. But here's the good / bad news. You really don't need that precise of movement to play this game, because this game is extremely forgiving, and I'm pretty sure I could have just sat down and gone through the first few levels of the game. The story mode offers a multitude of missions you have to accomplish while surfing or skating through these tracks, such as racking up points or traveling through gates. The thresholds for passing these levels and getting through the story mode are very low, that you could literally do whatever during them, that as long as you accidentally do some of what the mission asks of you, you'll be fine. I literally racked up points just for steering left for half of the track because going up these invisible walls would keep nabbing me points. It's sort of the opposite problem from another Kinect game I recently tried out, Sonic Free Riders. That game was not forgiving at all and had controls that simply weren't responsive. Surf and Skate's controls aren't much better, but the game is so forgetting that it doesn't make a huge difference. So I guess I'll give the game points for at least knowing its limits and adjusting accordingly, but as a result, the game honestly feels like a waste of time. When everything you do feels meaningless, it just makes the full game lack value. My motivation for going back to it is little to none. But like I said, it's got a pretty weird aesthetic, I guess, and I really do like the cel shaded style, and we also got some kooky SpongeBob and Patrick mottos. They give me so much life. Well, after that experience, I convinced myself that I've broken every single bone in my body and can no longer do any exercise whatsoever. So let's transition into a car crash simulator. SpongeBob's Boating Bash is made by American studio Impulse Games. Even though this is the racing giant technically, this game is more of a demolition derby, as it involves you bashing into other boats to rack up enough points or parts or whatever else to win the match. The whole game is tied together by a simple storyline where SpongeBob meets this driving instructor named Seymour Scales, who claims he can help SpongeBob get his boating license by recklessly driving into boats. It's a silly plot, but totally in vain of what SpongeBob is all about. Don't worry for Mrs. Puff fans though, we do get a couple awkward moments with her too.
Why, SpongeBob? Why?
While we're talking about the story, these cutscenes are some of the oddest ones I've ever seen in a SpongeBob game. The characters' lips are so off sync, and they also have just the slightest facial expressions at the most random times. Creature from the Krusty Krab had a similar issue, but the random change in facial expressions is definitely new to Boating Bash. I've also noticed that SpongeBob's motto is ripped from Truth or Square, but the other mottos look like they've been ripped from Atlanta Square Pandas, and so there's definitely a decrease in quality from SpongeBob compared to the other characters. As weird as the characters look here, I will admit it's probably not all that different from your typical fanfare licensed games. They also got away with showing the word ass. We stand Impulse. I will say the overall concept of having SpongeBob's only solo racing game being a demolition derby title is a strange idea to go for, but it ultimately matches up perfectly with SpongeBob, because obviously SpongeBob wrecks boats all the time on the actual show, so it totally works for the context. I'm a huge fan of Simpsons Hit and Run in particular, and always thought that kind of game with the SpongeBob license would be a brilliant idea. There's even a full-blown mod replacing everything in the game with SpongeBob characters, assets, and missions, and it honestly suits SpongeBob so well and just makes me want to see this even more. While this game doesn't have the adventuring aspect I would love to be here, it certainly has more than enough destructive mayhem. But with that being said, is the game actually good? Well, yeah, it is. I'm not gonna lie, I was having a blast with this game. In fact, I'm probably gonna go back to it after this video is finished because I want to get to the end of the story mode and experience the game in its entirety. At first I had trouble adjusting to the overall feel of the game. These are hefty vehicles, so it takes a bit of practice and rhythm to figure out how to best turn them around versus backing up to get to where you need to. But once once you get the hang of it, it's very satisfying to smash into vehicles and rack up points and parts that push you into the lead. My favorite type of match has to be the actual races, because they're not actually full-on races, but you more so earn points that get counted at the end by ramming into vehicles in creative ways. The more creative, the higher the points. It's just complete chaos when you're playing these types of matches because of the mixture of speed and destruction. You just gotta be careful to not wreck your own vehicles, so there's some incentive to be strategic as well. Most of the game is placed in these closed off areas where you gotta just bash or knock out the other players. Some of the tracks have tons of ways to fall off of them though, which automatically makes you lose. These tend to be the least fun ones for me, especially if you're still trying to get used to the controls. I'm sure these levels will become more fun for me as I keep playing, but I definitely prefer the environments where half of the track wasn't an automatic game over bit. Honestly, this game is fun and I really wish it had online play or something. I would definitely love to see the idea revisited with that feature implemented, or even better, having this gameplay implemented into an adventure game and giving us that true SpongeBob licensed hit and run experience. A guy can dream. I guess Mom was right, you can't play Cupid in real life. But what you can play is an obscure downloadable game that no one cares about. Underpants Slam is an action puzzle game released on Xbox Live Arcade on December 26th of 2007. It was developed by Blitz Arcade, which is really just Blitz Games. This game actually has a little bit of notoriety from recent years. On January 7th of 2013, the game was delisted from the Xbox Live Marketplace following the bankruptcy of THQ. However, on September 24th, 2018, it was relisted on the Xbox Live Marketplace by THQ Nordic. It was one of the very first signs of some sort of return for Spongebob games. And of course, the following year, we saw the announcement of Rehydrated. And so I remember seeing videos of people reporting on this, kind of just taking every breadcrumb we could get for Spongebob games. If only they knew. There is a plot to this game, but it's really not expanded upon in the actual game. A storm current has disrupted a shipment of the undergarments of King Neptune's underwear, spreading them across the ocean floor. Neptune has called upon his subjects to collect the lost undergarments, with a reward offered to the one who collects the most pairs of underwear. You can immediately tell this game was created by Blitz Games because all of its music is actually recycled from Creature from the Krusty Krab. The models themselves also come from Atlantis Pandas, which is actually one of the featured levels here. You even have the same awkward Mr. Krabs model here along with an amusing running animation. You can play as SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Plankton. Yeah, I guess Squidward just wasn't in the mood to join this adventure. The game functions as a 2.5D side-scroller. You play levels where the goal is to find all 99 pairs of underwear within the time limit. Each pair of underwear does increase your time though, so as long as you're observant, it's not a challenging task. To my surprise, I actually found this setup to be quite fun. It definitely gives off that arcade-like energy and was a refreshing change of pace compared to the other games I played for this video. It's very simplistic and there's really not much to it, but it's a nice little game I'd recommend for dedicated SpongeBob fans to try out. The only complaint I can really give is that the jump is a bit floaty. You have to hold the jump button to gauge how high it is, and it just never felt 100% comfortable or accurate to me. But it wasn't game breaking. However, I don't think the game is worth $10, which is how much I paid for it. But I doubt the game's gonna see a discount anytime soon, so you'll basically have to deal with that. This may make me seem like the devil, but when I was a child, I hated art class, and so when I found out there was a SpongeBob game based around art, I was really ecstatic. Spongebob Squiggle Pants was developed by WayForward Technologies and released for the Wii in North America on April 12th of 2011. It is the fourth of 10 games to use the UDraw game tablet accessory that was developed by THQ. Basically it works exactly as it looks. You have a space to draw things and more depending on what the game asks for. Squiggle Pants borrows its concept from the WarioWare series, consisting of a series of rapid-fire minigames. Honestly, not a bad idea for a SpongeBob game considering the universe. But man, the art styles that are used for this game are just out of this world. You get to see SpongeBob and friends in so many different visual interpretations, and it honestly is like candy for your eyes. I love seeing all these different styles for SpongeBob. It honestly brings so much life to Bikini Bottom, and it's very refreshing to see with so many SpongeBob games using the same 3D models and color schemes prior to this one. This game may not sport any impressive 3D graphics, but the style it offers adds a lot of enjoyment to the game. I also think the idea of a WarioWare-like SpongeBob game is definitely fitting for the franchise. I think SpongeBob really just lends itself to party minigame collections. It's such a fun and vibrant universe, and this game really does take advantage of it. I will say though that the decision to make Patchy the pirate essentially this game's leading voice is really weird. His inclusion helps explain the game's premise, which is him wanting to create a museum of SpongeBob artwork, and the only way to fill the museum is by playing through all these minigames. It's definitely an interesting twist to the typical setup for a SpongeBob game, which usually involves SpongeBob waking up in his pineapple setting off on an adventure, but I dig it. Turning our attention to the game itself, I'm not gonna lie, I did have some fun with this game in the beginning. The WarioWare-like format is a blast with the SpongeBob license. It can be a ton of fun going through these games trying to last as long as possible. But that's only when the games work. Let me expand that by saying this isn't a broken game. It functions perfectly fine and the tablet itself is pretty responsive. But some of these games just aren't appropriately designed for what you have at your disposal. Let's take this one minigame for instance. You have to flip these 3 parts to try to match up all parts to a character. Sounds simple enough. The problem lies in having to use the tablet to do this where you can't actually see where your cursor is landing on. You have to place your cursor on a spot you think matches up to the piece and then look up at the TV screen to see if it did. And even if you did, if you don't move in the right way, you can't even move the piece correctly. And you're expected to do this in 5 seconds because of the WarioWare-like structure. I failed this game more than half the times I played it due to this difficulty. And there's many other minigames unfortunately where similar issues pop up. It makes me think that if there were a 3DS version of the game, it'd probably work way better on there. Oh, what do you know? There is. If anything, this game showed me a lot of how this tablet shouldn't be used. The game is certainly fun when the minigame is appropriately designed for the tablet, but when you get to a minigame where it isn't, it shows how frustrating this accessory can get and the game becomes a frustrating mess to try to get through. I certainly think this is a solid idea for a SpongeBob game, and maybe if it didn't rely on a tablet, it could have had better minigames and be more accessible. So I'd love to see a spiritual successor in the future with the same kind of wacky and spontaneous art styles to elevate the experience, but please keep this tablet away from it. Just burn it with fire or something, I don't care. Well, I think I've had just about enough creativity for one video, so why don't we end the night with a game that's completely void of anything like that? What the f is this? Creature from the Krusty Krab was a platform video game released for the PS2, GameCube, and Wii, developed by Blitz Games. What a surprise! If you're somewhat of a fan of SpongeBob games, you've most certainly heard of Creature from the Krusty Krab and are absolutely not surprised by its inclusion on this list. This game is the epitome of weirdness when it comes to SpongeBob games, by far being one of the strangest and most experimental games of the franchise. The premise itself is a bit difficult to explain without full-on spoiling the game's story, but essentially SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton are adventuring through their dreams in wacky scenarios that somehow end up intersecting and climaxing the end with some really wacky revelations. Part of the climax was the highly marketed levels where you have a giant plankton rampaging through Bikini Bottom under a horror aesthetic, with SpongeBob on a tiny plane attempting to stop him. Aside from being a magnet for any boy that liked games during the time, it certainly was not the first instance of this game's strange aesthetics. The very first level places SpongeBob in a racetrack infused Bikini Bottom, where he takes on the persona of this grunge/punk inspired racer and is speeding through Bikini Bottom against his friends who look just as ridiculous. Interspersed through these races are platforming sections where regular-ish SpongeBob is collecting car parts to enhance his vehicle. The next level stars Patrick as a comic book superhero as he fights through a Bikini Bottom that looks straight out of the Crimson Chin universe, battling his arch nemesis who is practically himself. These are just some examples of the crazy aesthetics this game uses, and I can't lie, I am absolutely in love with the imagination this game exudes. But how does it play? I have a full video where I delved into my opinion on this game you can check out in the top right corner, but here's the gist of what I said. Creature from the Krusty Krab is just as weird in the gameplay department as it is presentation wise. I count about 5 separate gameplay styles you'll need to play through, along with an assortment of minigames sprinkled into the campaign. This game to me is a literal definition of an artist just splattering paint and seeing what sticks. It tries out so many different ideas, which is fine to an extent to add variety, but it also runs the risk of not having any ideas truly fleshed out due to the divided focus, and that's my main issue with this game. The platforming really pales in comparison to many that came before it, as the level design is so much less interesting compared to the likes of BFBB in the movie game. There's so much brain-numbing combat here, and the levels feel like they drag on for so much longer than the levels in those games. This is especially rampant of all the levels in Alaskan Bowl Worm, but part of that might just be due to the horrendous visuals as well. Giant Plankton is also way more hyped up than what he actually is, which is just sluggish maneuvering with mindless combat and destruction. It looks and feels cool at first for like 10 seconds, but then it just gets old. I will say, the game isn't isn't terrible and definitely has its fun moments, and I'm a huge fan of the risks it took in the presentation department, but the gameplay is just not there to support these ideas. But I know for a fact that there's tons of people that love this game, and it makes complete sense to me. I may not have found it to be that great, but the world it creates is certainly interesting and deserves to be celebrated. I'd love to see another SpongeBob game tackle the dream concept and maybe take the ideas of creation from the Krusty Krab and just make them even better, because it certainly had a lot of potential. I just think the focus was a little bit too all over the place to really reach what it could have been. After taking a look at all these games, I've come to the conclusion that taking interesting ideas and turning them into full-blown games does not always guarantee a solid product. It's a risk, to say the least, to take such an iconic property like SpongeBob and injecting some original ideas that may not necessarily completely fall in line with the franchise's identity. However, we've definitely seen some examples of weird ideas bringing great things to the table. I mean, I'm probably going to be ferociously murdered by Creature from the Krusty Krab fans after this video goes up. I guess what I'm trying to say is that having an open mind to anything weird or interesting can be really beneficial. Allowing that creativity to flourish like a waterfall and pour into these projects freely can lead to something both new and brilliant. So before you see Mario morph into a werewolf and claim it's the end of the world, give it a chance. Just because it's weird doesn't mean it should be eradicated on the spot. Keep an open mind, and it's gonna bring you so much happiness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late. Thank you so much for watching this video. Special shout out to The Nerd Corner, Killer Lemurs, Team Ride with Science Gamers, Johnny Hinton Ortiz, Timebender, Jeremy Games, Amarillo66, Trash Q, Abraham Muter, and Mass Muter. These are my patrons / YouTube members. If you'd like to become a patron or YouTube member, get access to a whole bunch of different perks, and please check out the links in the description box below. But alright, this is Riders, riding out.